Blog Talk Radio.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Context of White Supremacy, Gus T. Renegade. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the C.O.W.S, Constructive Information on the System of Racism, White Supremacy, what it is, how it works. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, checking out the programs. I appreciate your support. I wanted to make a special note. Last program with Mr. Tim Wise, admitted white supremacist, alleged anti-racist, battery on my cell phone, conked out, wasn't able to close out the program. I guess that is the system of racism, white supremacy. Non-white person not even able to close out his own program. Left up to Tim Wise to end the program. But, yeah, that's what happened. You did not hear that program. Check it out. Interesting information, Mr. Gus T. Renegade and Mr. Tim Wise, the Elvis Presley of counter-racism. Definitely check that out. And if you listened or participated in the previous episode with Mr. Tim Wise, you can check out Toy Talk. She has a program on Blog Talk Radio this Friday. That is June 5th. Friday, June 5th. Tim Wise will be on her program at 9:30 a.m. Pacific, 12:30 a.m. Eastern. If you check that program out, I would say that would be a live opportunity to see if Mr. Wise indeed does all of the things that he said he does on the last program, informing individuals about other non-white people, victims of white supremacy, who have written about or talk about racism, white supremacy, so that people can get in touch with them, the information that they have about this system. He said that he tells non-white people that they should be suspicious of all white people, no exceptions, including himself. He points out the work of Mr. Fuller, Dr. Francis Cresswell, and he said he actually had a list of non-white people who've written books and things that he tells people that they should investigate. He said he would not use the term whiteness as a synonym with the phrase white supremacy, or with the term, white supremacy. So Friday, that will give you a immediate opportunity to investigate if Mr. Wise indeed does all of the things that he said he does when he gives presentations on racism, white supremacy. Get an opportunity this Friday. Again, Toy Talk, it's Toyi Talk. This Friday on Blog Talk Radio, 9:30 a.m. Pacific, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. So, yeah, if you go on Blog Talk Radio, if you do a search for Tim Wise, I'm sure that show will pop up. It'll probably be highlighted in orange as a coming up episode. So check it out. Perhaps even call in and ask questions for Mr. Wise. I think that would be very interesting. Also, I want to make a note, for anyone who checked out that episode, please check the link I posted on the comment section for the episode with Mr. Tim Wise. There's a link. Mr. Wise sent me some emails prior to the last program. Those emails are available online, unedited. You can go to the link. It's in the comment section of the previous episode. You can click it, should take you there. Just scroll down. They are very lengthy emails. Read those, and then keep in mind what was said during the broadcast. See what you think. Again, please check the blog, racism-notes.blogspot.com, racism-notes.blogspot.com. I have been very busy doing a lot of shows. This is the fourth show I have done since last Wednesday, so I've been very busy doing programs and other things. But I definitely am looking forward to getting some free time to updating my blog. And, so please check the blog. Also, if you're listening to this program at Blog Talk Radio, subscribe to the C.O.W.S. Blue link right in the description. Click on it. And, you'll get updates whenever I'm going to do episodes. You'll be the first to know. You'll know which guest is going to be on the program, what we'll be talking about, so you will always be informed. Also, if you're listening at Blog Talk Radio, favorite the program. I appreciate that. Just click the heart that's in the player for the particular episode. That's very helpful. I would appreciate it. It takes 5 seconds. Thank you so much. And thank everyone who's been tuning in for the show. I appreciate the support. I'm going to check the switchboard to see if we have Mr. Ayers so we can get cracking with today's program.
Yep. He's going on and on. I'm going to do a time check with him as soon as I get him. Hello?
We also want everyone in the chat room. Hello.
Hello.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Is this Mr. Ayers?
Yes, it is.
Outstanding. Mr. Bill Ayers.
Good to meet you.
Good to meet you as well, sir. Thank you so much. As I said, you are quite the celebrity. There were a lot of
I apologize.
eyebrows. Oh, no apologies, sir. No apologies.
Let me ask you quickly, how much time are we going to spend this afternoon?
My program is scheduled for 2 hours, as much time as you are able to spend with us to discuss your work. I appreciate it. If you have other things to get to, I understand that as well.
Okay, I never really did know the time, and I was in a meeting, but I've come out. I guess I have about a half hour. Is that okay?
I'll work with what we got.
Good.
Okie dokie. That's my fault. I should have been more clear about the timing.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't know, what the format was, and I apologize.
That's no apology, sir. I will get cracking then.
Okay. Good.
Are you a white person?
Yeah, that's what. Yes, or as Stephen Colbert says, they say I am because I live in a gated community that says whites only. Yeah, I'm a white person, okay. And I wrote the book. With my partner, Bernadine Dorn, called Race Course Against White Supremacy.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
For this program, I have taken the position that we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, and the definition that I use for white supremacy is a global system of people who are dedicated to, a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think that is a correct definition, and do you believe such a system exists?
I absolutely think that white supremacy is the right term, because it is a system indeed. It's a system of control. It goes back beyond eugenics, but eugenics was, the so-called science of race that was so popular in this country and influenced the Nazis. But it goes back way beyond that, and it's been solidified. And the astonishing thing about white supremacy, and I take your definition, is the astonishing thing about it is, as a structure, it has survived in this country a revolution, a civil war, a civil rights upheaval, all kinds of all manner of activism against it, all manner of blows to it, including the most recent blow to white supremacy, which was the election of an African American president. But through it all, white supremacy is still standing, and that's what we can marvel at in terms of its capacity to hold on.
Okay. And do you feel the definition that I gave, that is a correct definition for the system?
Yeah, I didn't write it down, but it sounded right to me. A system of dominance, controlled by, largely by people who classify themselves as white, and who are dedicated to dominating all the people they consider non-white. I think that's how you put it, as
Yes.
well as dominating the earth and the natural resources. Subjugating everything in the interest of their own power, greed, supremacy.
Okay. Interest of time, I was going to point out, Mr. Bill Ayers, I don't know the people who are tuning in, if you are students of history, how familiar you are with Mr. Bill Ayers, but I was going to ask you if you could tell them about yourself, but it would be like, in my view, it'd be like 8 different people since you've done so many things.
Well, I'm currently a professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and I, teach in the College of Education, and I write mostly about kids and teaching and so on. But if you go back 40 years, and my most recent book, incidentally, with Bernardine Dorn, is called Race Course Against White Supremacy. But if you go back 40 or more years, I'm now 65, I was a leader of Students for a Democratic Society. We were, very active in supporting the Black Freedom Movement. We were very active in opposing U.S. imperial war in Vietnam and elsewhere, but importantly in Vietnam. And in 1965, when I was first arrested opposing the war in Vietnam as a 20-year-old, something like 70 or 80% of Americans supported the war. 3 years later, something like 55% opposed the war. And a lot happened in those 3 years. Certainly anti-war activism was part of it. Much more important than that, I think, was that large segments of the Black Freedom Movement, as has been true currently, came out against the war. And importantly, Muhammad Ali, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Martin Luther King, came out decisively, determinedly, explicitly against the war. SNCC said no black man should go 10,000 miles away to fight for a so-called freedom he doesn't enjoy in Mississippi. And Muhammad Ali said, I won't fight in the white man's army. No Viet Cong ever called me the N-word. And Martin Luther King, the mythology of King is this kind of saint who came along and made us all better people. But if you read the speeches of King, especially from 65 to 68, you see an angry pilgrim making the link between racial justice, economic justice, and peace or global justice. And it was that link that was so powerful. So in April 4th, 1967, King says the United States is on the wrong side of the world revolution, and we have to get on the right side. He says that the greatest purveyor of violence on earth is the U.S. government, and he won't condemn young blacks in the ghetto with rifles without condemning his own government first. So this is a very dramatic shift. And then we have the other thing that happened between those years 65 to 68 is that vets came home and told the truth about what they had seen and what they'd been asked to do. And at that point, the war, was unwinnable. So in late March of 1968, a sitting president announced he would not run for president. Lyndon Johnson said he would step aside. And we all thought, those of us who were, 20 years old, 23 years old, thought we had won. And 5 days later, King was dead. And a couple of months after that, Kennedy was dead. And a couple of months after that, Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon came up with a plan to expand and extend the war. So there we were in 1968, and here was the situation. We had convinced the American people the war was wrong. The entire black community now stood against the war. Large segments of the white community were against the war, and we couldn't stop it. So it was a crisis for democracy. It was a crisis for the movement. And at that point, the movement split into many, many different segments. And in my own family, my own siblings, we did 5 different things. One of us deserted the army and ran away to Europe. One of us went to a commune in California. One of us joined the Democratic Party and tried to build the peace wing. One of us went into the factories and tried to organize industrial workers. And I was one of the founders of the Weather Underground, which created an underground organization that wanted to survive what we took to be an impending American fascism, and we wanted to bring the war to the war makers. That was our goal. I wrote a book about it called Fugitive Days, which came out in 2001, and that's the notoriety that you're referring to, and that's the notoriety that came up in the recent presidential campaign.
Yes, sir. A lot of the folks that I talked to, they definitely remember the so-called controversy between President Obama and his whatever ties they said he had with you in Chicago and all that flack. People definitely remembered that. And
I mean, the dishonesty of that was so profound, and it took many twists and turns. But clearly, the Clinton campaign and then the McCain-Palin campaign couldn't figure out a way to run against Barack Obama. And what they did instead was to create this mythology that he hung around with mysterious and scary people and therefore was not to be trusted. So the first thing they did was to demonize Jeremiah Wright. And when that fell flat, they demonized me and a good friend and colleague, Rashid Khalidi, Palestinian scholar. And the demonization was not right or fair in the sense that all you have to do is pick up one of Jeremiah Wright's books or any of his thousands of sermons, and you see a deeply humanistic, deeply committed, anti-racist, and humane fighter for freedom. So, that was dishonest. But the more dishonest narrative was that somehow guilt by association, that if Obama knew Wright or knew me or knew Khalidi, that somehow he was tarred by our experiences. And that's a myth that goes way back in American political history. But the idea that because Barack Obama and I were on several boards together, because we lived in the same neighborhood, because we might have shared a meal or something else, that somehow we're responsible for one another's policies, politics, outlook, experiences. That's dishonest. And then the further dishonesty was when Sarah Palin got a hold of it and started accusing him of palling around with terrorists, and I was the supposed terrorist that he palled around with. And she began to say, for example, there are real Americans and then there are the rest of the people. Well, that cuts you and me and, a majority of people out of the political public square, and that is really dangerous. Gratefully, thankfully, the American electorate rejected those arguments.
I want to, again, since you have a brief amount of time, I really want to try and maximize the conversation that we have so that it can be as constructive as possible, and really focus on the system of white supremacy, which is what your book is talking about, and a lot of your work centers around, and I try to get some constructive suggestions and your views. I'm going to try and pick out some of the things that I think are most important. This might seem strange to some of the listeners. In my view, the eighth area of people activity, sexual intercourse, is a very important and frequently understudied area of racism, white supremacy. When I read your book, you quoted many non-white scholars, activists, people who have written about and worked against the system of racism, white supremacy, Audre Lorde, Frantz Fanon, Lorraine Hansberry, Orlando Patterson, Richard Wright, Stokely Carmichael, James Baldwin, Mary Baraka, formerly known as Leroy Jones, and Frederick Douglass, amongst many others. I couldn't even write them all down. At least amongst the people that I just named, unless I've been misinformed, all of those non-white people were involved in sexual relationships with white people, except Stokely Carmichael, but his sister married a white person, unless I've been
Is that right? I had no idea.
I keep track of this, and they're all on my database.
Why do you call it the eighth activity? I've never heard that. What do you mean the eighth activity?
If anyone is familiar with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr.'s work, he is a non-white male who's written about the system of racism, white supremacy, and he talks about how white supremacy dominates all 9 areas of people activity: education, economics, entertainment, labor, law, religion, politics, sex, and war.
I'll be darned. I never heard that. That's interesting.
One of your book, Race Course Against White Supremacy, is published on Third World Press.
Right.
One of your fellow publishing mates, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, she is also an author who talks about racism, white supremacy. She, too, references those 9 major areas of people activity. Both of those individuals feel that it is incorrect for non-white people to engage in sexual intercourse with white people under the system of racism, white supremacy, as do I, and this pops up all the time. I feel it's incorrect for 2 reasons. Number one, in a system of racism, white supremacy, you have an unequal power dynamic between non-white people and white people. People generally suggest that you shouldn't have sexual intercourse between 2 people where there's an unequal power dynamic. And white people have consistently shown the ability to deceive non-white people about whether or not they practice racism. So you frequently have a non-white person thinking this white person is trustworthy when in fact they are not, and this white person has been practicing racism. Those are the 2 main reasons that I feel it's incorrect for non-white people to engage in sexual intercourse with white people. And I just cited all of the authors that you, or authors-activists that you cited in your work, who all engaged in, many of these folks married white people. How do you feel about this?
Well, I had no idea. First of all, you didn't mention James Baldwin, who we also reference, and also had relations with white people. The other ones I didn't even know. Frederick Douglass, had no idea. But I guess I probably disagree with you for a couple of reasons. One is that if people should avoid having sexual relationships whenever there's unequal power in a kind of abstract, measure of inequality, then men shouldn't have sex with women.
That actually has come up before. The chair of women's studies, David Allen, he made that, and he's an admitted white supremacist. He made the same comment, and he conceded that did come up during the so-called 60s. A lot of women said, we're not going to have sex with men until this problem is corrected. And it came up again. A female just told me today in Kenya, women are saying the same thing. And I told him, do you think it's strange that has never popped up in non-white people, victims of white supremacy, dealing with the system of racism, white supremacy?
Are you sure it's never popped up? I mean, you'd have to know a lot to know that it's never popped up. I mean, the world is big and varied, and stuff pops up all over the place.
You are correct, and I will say it would be most accurate to say I am unaware of a significant portion of non-white people ever taking the stance that it is incorrect to engage in sexual intercourse between non-white people and white people under the system of white supremacy. I am unaware of that.
Oh, and also men and women, I think you were going to reference. I don't know that many white people have ever, I'm unaware of many white people ever raising the question of men and women not having sex because of unequal power, but I only raise it because you said that your argument would be unequal power should forbid you from having sexual relations, but certainly in a situation of male supremacy, which we also experience in our society, that's unequal power right there. But I guess I would say this, that it's not, for me, it's not a principled question, but I do think that the world is a wild and crazy and diverse place, and human beings find all kinds of ways to interact, become friends, become mate, relate, date, all of that. And I don't think that there are very many rules that I would say cover the spectrum of what human beings can and might, should do. So I don't know. I don't have a rule about it myself.
Right. I'm just asking your view.
Yeah. My view is that people are strange and nutty, and the categories, the ways that we categorize people are also strange and crazy. And I'm sure you believe in part that race is, at least in part, a social construction that is part of the white supremacist, kind of ideology. So that 100 years ago in eugenics, there weren't 4 or 5 or 6 races. There were 140. That was somebody's construction of how you would know, what the rules should be between the races. Well, I think that, those kinds of things are nuttier and nuttier. And so you see, for example, race changing all the time. It used to be, for example, in Chicago, that crime statistics were reported as black, white, Mexican, Italian, Irish, Jewish, and those were races. Those were actual races that people actually saw. They don't exist anymore, not like that.
I completely agree. And at the end of the day, since we are in agreement, we have a system of racism, white supremacy. I have concluded that the white people who practice white supremacy are in charge of changing the so-called racial class. Okay.
I agree.
So,
I agree.
as we're in a system of racism, white supremacy, in my view, it would be a logical step to take that the non-white people, the victims of white supremacy, just in the interest of self-defense and clarity, make an effort to be suspicious of all white people. And I don't think you can be suspicious of someone that you're engaging in sexual intercourse with. In fact, Dr.
I'm not so sure about that.
Hold on one second.
Yeah.
Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., he is a non-white male victim of white supremacy. He was on this program. He admitted to being engaged in a sexual relationship with a white person, an admitted racist, in fact.
Wow.
Yeah, okay. Now, he said, on testimony, he said, in the system of white supremacy, white people are conditioned to see all black people as niggers. His own testimony, he said. And I said, okay, what about the white person you're in a sexual relationship? Does she see you as a nigger? He said, yes. I said, okay, and we went to the phones. Now I'll ask you, do you think in the system of racism, white supremacy, all white people are trained to see black people, every one of them, as a nigger?
Well, I think that's part of the conditioning, without a doubt, and it takes on a variety of forms depending on the era we're living in and what we come to accept and so on. But absolutely, I think it's part of the conditioning is a sense of white superiority, which means non-white inferiority. Absolutely.
Okay, so if I am a non-white person, a victim of white supremacy, if I'm engaging in a sexual relationship with a white person, explicitly and or implicitly, am I agreeing with your assessment that I'm a non-white person, I am a nigger, if I'm engaged in a sexual relationship with a white person?
I don't believe that at all. And the reason is because what we were talking about a minute ago was, are white people conditioned to feel that way? And the answer to that, I agreed with you, is yes. But no, I don't think that we can paint the broad picture and say across the board, because you're conditioned, because that's your upbringing, because that's your training, there's no possibility of transformation. There's no possibility of change. Nor do I think you could say that people who've been victimized by that system are particularly being victimized by this particular person that they fall in love with. So I don't know if Frederick Douglass was in love with a white woman, I don't know, or a white man. I don't even know what the historical reference is. I don't think it's necessarily the case that he's then saying, therefore, I am inferior. I don't think Frederick Douglass said I don't know because I wasn't privy to their intimate relationship. But I don't think it's a given that because the white people he was dealing with were conditioned in this direction, that he therefore was buying into thinking of himself as inferior because he had an intimate relationship with somebody. No. I don't see why that logically follows, unless you think that human beings are infinitely manipulatable and unable to ever transform the manipulations they're subjected to. I mean, you are a man. You were raised to think of yourself as superior to women, and you might or might not struggle with that, but I don't think you can say that even though every man is conditioned to think of himself as superior to every woman, I don't actually think that you can say that in every instance a woman who engages in a relationship with a man is therefore self-hating. No.
I want to point out for the folks that are listening, in my view, when I have been in conversations of racism, white supremacy, when white people bring up sexism, homophobia, any other isms other than racism, white supremacy, I suspect they are practicing racism, white supremacy, number one, by moving the conversation away from white supremacy. Number two, I never reference myself as a man. I never reference any non-white person as a man. I am a victim of white supremacy. I do not have supremacy or superiority. I do not have supremacy or superiority over anyone. I am victimized and dominated by white people who practice racism in all areas of people activity.
So you don't enjoy any privileges whatsoever?
Whatever I have, I am given by white people who practice racism, white supremacy, and I have very little in the system of racism, white supremacy. I also want to point out, in terms of being informed on the subject matter, you, according to your own testimony, didn't know that all of those people that I listed were in sexual relationships with white people.
I
so
didn't
I suspect you have not really examined this subject matter to come to an informed conclusion. I have. I didn't even have to go and study any of these folks. I knew all of these people were in sexual relationships
but I don't claim,
with white people.
But no, you're right. I don't claim expertise on very much of anything, and certainly not on the eighth activity. I asked you about that. I claim no expertise.
Hold on one second. Let's hold on one second then, because I said I'm fast forwarding. I prefaced before I even brought this up. I said I'm fast forwarding to what I think is one of the most important things that needs to be discussed.
Right.
I have studied this particular area. As I said, I knew all of these people were in sexual relationships with white people. If you said you didn't know that, I would think you would be much more receptive to why I would say that. And that's something I'll have to think about, as opposed to immediately taking the position that, no, I don't think that's true. That's nutty.
No, I didn't say it wasn't true or nutty. I didn't say that at all.
You said their people are diverse, and people do lots of nutty things all around the world.
Complicated and absolutely.
Exactly.
And the other thing that I think that I would say is that, I don't think that anyone in America can kind of slip out from the fact that we do enjoy certain privileges over other people. And, the fact that we eat every day is a privilege over a lot of people. And all I was raising around that is to understand the complexity of that is not to excuse white supremacy or to put it on the back seat. I think white supremacy is the central motor force of this country from its founding till today. I still think it is. But I also think that there's a lot of complexity in there, and you can't simply paint it categorically and therefore, say that, this all makes sense. I'm following what you're saying about the eighth activity. It's not something I know much about.
Okay. Do you have 5 suggestions that you would give to non-white people and or white people, things that you think would be constructive to combat the system of racism, white supremacy?
Well, with white people, I am very clear that we need to, number one, open our eyes and see the system for what it is. That's number one. Number two, we have to get away from the mythologizing of things like the civil rights movement that want to pretend that everything has been solved and that that's an old issue, that that's not something of contemporary interest. I disagree with that. Number three, I think we have to fight consistently to change the frame around which we discuss certain issues. Let me take education or criminal justice, which are two of the things we talk about in the book. In education, there's a lot of talk in the popular, media and in the mainstream about the so-called achievement gap. And what we try to do in the book is to say there is no achievement gap. What there is an educational debt. And if you see it as a debt, not a gap, you begin to see the ways in which, for example, reparations for slavery is not something that should be thought of as kooky and off the discussion, but something that's right in the middle of what we need to be thinking about. Same with criminal justice. If we drink the Kool-Aid and think that we're made safer by locking up 2.2 million of our fellow citizens and then handing them over to private contractors, first of all, we're fooling ourselves. Secondly, we're buying into the very white supremacy that the civil rights movement was supposed to be fighting against. So while we, on the one hand, genuflect in front of the civil rights movement, we buy into a prison system and an educational system that undoes whatever baby steps forward were made during that time.
Have you, in your studies, have you seen any evidence that the white people who practice racism, white supremacy, are going to stop practicing white supremacy and make an effort to practice justice? Have you seen any evidence that would suggest that that is true?
Well, if you're talking about, when you say the people who, say that again, the people who are
the white people who
running the system, running the system
who practice racism, white supremacy. Have you
white
seen
supremacy?
Any?
No, I mean, I think that the people who practice white supremacy and benefit from it are going to have to be stopped, and I think that's a huge undertaking, and I think it requires a revolution.
What do you mean when you say revolution?
Well, I mean a transfer of power, popular power, from the hands of the few who create the system and benefit from it into the hands of many. And that is a popular upheaval. It's something that doesn't have any blueprints that you can point to with any confidence and say this is how it's done. But I think that it is what needs to be done. It is what needs to happen.
I want to make sure I asked, you were active and working against racism, white supremacy, ostensibly, in the civil rights movement, along with Fred Hampton. You are both in Chicago.
Right.
Fred Hampton, for those of you who are not informed, you can go check out the archives. When Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly was on the program, he talked extensively about the FBI's conduct towards Fred Hampton and their role in his assassination. I wanted to ask you, and your involvement with Students for Democratic Society and the Weather Underground, advocated blowing up government buildings, participated in some of that activity, fugitive, were wanted. Now you are a distinguished professor of education at the University of Illinois in Chicago, senior university scholar. I'm just comparing that with Fred Hampton. To my knowledge, he did not participate in any explosives. He did not blow up anything, to my knowledge. He was not a fugitive at the time that he was assassinated. I'm just comparing those two. Do you think there's any way you could be in the position that you are right now if you are a non-white person?
No. I think that there's no question that white privilege operated during the student movement, during the civil rights movement, and of course even now. The assassination of Fred Hampton was a straight-up government-sponsored assassination. It was the highest levels of the FBI, the highest levels of the state's attorney's office, the highest levels of the city of Chicago conspired to kill him. And when they killed him and Mark Clark, his comrade, we knew it was an assassination. And we believed that the truth would never come out, but the truth has come out. And it came out, it took 13 years, but 13 years later the government settled with the Hampton family and the Clark family to the tune of millions of dollars and admitted their involvement in this murder. So I think that white supremacy was at work in the murder of Fred Hampton. I think the fact that Black Panthers were murdered and the white radicals were not, but got slipped past that, is a clear example of white supremacy at work, clear example of privilege at work.
Okay.
And we felt, our politics in the Weather Underground was to throw ourselves into solidarity with the Black Panthers as they were under attack, and to stand with them. So that several comrades of mine, including David Gilbert, are in prison right now in New York State, doing 75 to life as allies of the Black Liberation Army, which was an evolution out of the Panthers.
In your book, you talked about trustworthy white person. I'm just quoting from the book, and you were talking about how difficult it is to find such an individual. How would a white person, as long as we're in a system of white supremacy, how would a white person demonstrate to a non-white person that they are trustworthy?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that, but I I think the phrase you're pulling out is from the chapter on John Brown.
Yes, sir.
And we hold John Brown up as a model of somebody which is very rare in American history, but somebody who in many ways demonstrated his willingness to be an ally, someone in solidarity with, rather than the patronizing stance of in service to the liberation movement. And so John Brown bought a farm up in the Adirondack Mountains, where I was last month at the anniversary of his birth. He's buried there with his children. He bought a farm up there because it was next to Timbuktu, a free African farming community. He smuggled slaves out of slavery. He went to Kansas with his children. So it wasn't just him taking a risk, it was him and his children taking a risk. That's unprecedented in many ways. Went to Kansas, fought in bloody Kansas to make sure Kansas, in fact, it was called bloody Kansas because of John Brown. And John Brown's strategy for dealing with the grand jury that indicted him was to, attack the grand jurors. And then he hatched the plot at Harper's Ferry. And really, in many ways, you could say that John Brown started the Civil War. So that was a person who went beyond pleas for justice and pleas for moral behavior and put his body on the line in the service of black freedom and lost his life in that service. So, it's in that context that we say how rare a trustworthy white person.
Yes, sir. Given that, you said that you don't know how or if a white person could demonstrate to a non-white person that they're trustworthy as long as the system of white supremacy exists.
Well, perhaps then the way forward is to attack that system, and that's what John Brown did. Yeah.
In attacking that system, do you think it would be constructive for non-white people to be suspicious of all white people as long as the system of white supremacy exists?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Even yourself?
Absolutely. Because I think that kind of white privilege and the system of white supremacy does mean that, you can get a pass, you can step off the train and so on. And the proof of John Brown's solidarity is in the kind of production of what he did. It's not in his proclamations, it's not in his writings, it's what he actually was willing to do.
Okay. I wanted to ask about white people taking things personal. It's been my experience that I won't say many, but a significant number of non-white people have a lot of hostile feelings about white people and say they don't like white people, things of that nature. I have taken the position that I think it would be constructive. Any white person who wants to work against the system of racism, white supremacy, they should not take anything personal that any non-white person, victim of white supremacy, has to say about white people should never be taken personal. I wouldn't care what that non-white person says because they're responding to their mistreatment in the system of white supremacy. Do you think that is a correct stance?
I think that makes perfect sense. I don't think that people should take personally. I mean, I think that I can think of other folks who I've known who I would say that applies to. I would say, Bill Kunstler, the great civil rights lawyer, was a white person who always took that stance that whatever is going on in terms of anger and lashing out and whatever form it takes should not be taken personally. It's really a lashing out at the system, and the system is unjust. It's historically unjust. It's contemporarily unjust, and therefore our job is to fight the system. If we could defeat the system and overthrow the system, we might be able to lay the groundwork for a just and humane society. But without defeating the system, inhumanity will recreate itself again and again.
Okay. Would you say that a white person who is taking anything that a non-white person says about white people, if a white person is taking it personally, would you say that white person could be practicing racism, white supremacy?
Well, it could be, but I think I would say that white person is mistaken in not going deep enough and not understanding the way the system works, because it's not personal. And so, I would agree that that's a mistake.
Okay. very constructive. I hope everyone heard that. That is a big problem I've seen. I hope more non-white people will share that suggestion that white people should not be taking things personal. Anything that a non-white person says should not be taking it personal.
Absolutely.
Do you think white people should engage in criticizing and or ridiculing anything that a non-white person does in attempting to replace white supremacy with justice?
Absolutely not. Should not ridicule. Should not put down. Should keep their eyes open and try to learn from it. And I think that what we see again and again in the news and in the mainstream and even in liberals and progressives is this kind of acceptance. Look, the thing we're witnessing right now around this Justice Sotomayor is so unbelievable to me. Here you have these avowed racists saying about her that she's a racist, right? Because she noticed that she was Latina, right? That she's Puerto Rican. And so these white supremacists are calling her on this. And what it reminds me of, and they're saying how horrible that she would take race into account or her background into account when she makes a judgment. I would never do that, say these white guys who, I mean, it's astonishing. So what it reminds me of, you may know this story, but Justice Constance Baker Motley, who was a civil rights lawyer, became a judge. And there was a law firm that was brought in front of her because a female associate was suing the law firm for discrimination. And the law firm, in its defense, asked Justice Motley to please step aside, recuse herself from this trial. And she said, why? And they said, because first, you're a woman, and therefore you're more likely to side with the woman. And secondly, you're black, and therefore you're sensitive to issues of discrimination. We would prefer to have somebody who could be fairer than you. And her response from the bench was withering, and she said, if you can find someone who is neither of race nor of gender, I will step aside. But until then, I'll sit right here and be fair. Now, isn't that astonishing that a white, lawyer would say, you're going to be prejudiced because you're a woman and because you're black. I won't be prejudiced because I'm a white male. Isn't that a classic? And that's what I think we're witnessing here with Justice Sotomayor.
It's to be expected, I think, in the system.
I think it's to be expected. You're right. So astonishing might be the wrong word. But it's the arrogance of it is overwhelming. And when I'm listening to the liberals, to Keith Olbermann and to Chris Matthews and others, they just seem to accept that being a white man is the default position, that's what we all are, that we're fair because we're white men, but that she somehow has to answer for one comment about taking her Latina background into account. It's crazy. It's absolute madness.
To be expected, as I said.
Yeah, to be expected. We live in a crazy world. You're right.
A white supremacy, a system of white supremacy. I try to catch people
Absolutely.
when they say things are crazy.
Well, you've got it right. You've got it right. And I think of James Baldwin often saying, the madness of white supremacy. But you're right. It's a system. It's absolutely a system. Listen, brother, I'm going to have to leave in 4 or 5 minutes. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I can squeeze in 3 questions in that time.
That's great.
You talked about white people you even said admitted, avowed racist white supremacists accusing non-white people of being racist.
Yes.
I wanted to talk about that. Is it possible for a non-white person, a victim of white supremacy, to be racist?
Impossible. And one of the things that people always make a mistake, with, it seems to me, is they confuse the system of white supremacy with prejudice. So they like to claim, I'm not prejudiced, therefore I'm not part of the system of white supremacy. But the system sits above you as an individual and pulls the strings in many ways. So no, I don't think a non-white person can be racist, can be a supremacist in that sense. No way.
Okay. If a white person, a suspected racist, is labeling non-white people as racist, do you believe that's an act of racism, white supremacy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we just saw Senator Sessions and Senator Mitch McConnell and Senator, even some of the liberals saying, oh, how horrible that Sotomayor would would make this comment about being brown-skinned, and yet that, in my view, is the practice of racism, racial prejudice right there.
Okay. A non-white person was just telling me about this, that they think one of the big problems in terms of non-white people understanding the system of white supremacy, they think that white people don't see them as people, as human beings, and that is the problem. And they do not understand that we are in a system where white people who practice racism, white supremacy, dominate non-white people worldwide. I was curious if you have seen the same thing in terms of non-white people just thinking that the problem is white people don't see them as equals, as opposed to the white people who practice racism creating a system that guarantees non-white people will not be treated as equal in any area.
I agree with you that it is that system, and I don't think it's a matter of simply recognition. I think that the system is in itself geared to dehumanization. You think about, for example, the Middle Passage, you think about slavery, and you think whatever people began with, they had to create a system of justification. They had to create the base of all the prejudice that came out of that. Wasn't necessarily even in the beginning sincere belief. Rather, it was a justification for dominance, for superiority, for exploitation. And so you end up with a system, not a set of personal opinions, but a system. And that system, until that system is overthrown, you have, every behavior is in many ways boxing or framing that system.
Okay, I'll shoot this as the last one. Do you think white people are more informed about the system of racism, white supremacy, and I mean what it is, how it works? Do you think that the white people are more informed than non-white people about how this system of white supremacy works?
No, I think I don't. I mean, I think that probably the rulers have some pretty deep understanding of it, but no, I think white people are mystified to a large extent into not understanding what the system is. And it's always the case that the victims of oppression see it more clearly than the victimizers. They see it with more accuracy. They see it with more nuance, more complexity than those who are justifying their behavior and enacting that dominance.
How, I guess, if you can, before you run, how do the victims demonstrate their knowledge of the system of white supremacy?
I don't know. I mean, how should they? How do they? They do by resisting in 1,000 ways, which has been true throughout history. But how can we? How should we to be effective at overthrowing that system? I am agnostic. I'm not sure.
That's great. I was laughing because I had Tim Wise. You wrote about him in your book. Tim Wise, Elvis Presley.
I mentioned him. Yeah.
Yeah, he was on the program Monday, and he too said he was agnostic about whether or not white people would ever stop practicing racism, white supremacy. And wow, that's very interesting.
Two agnostics in a row. Well, the thing is that I think that I have to believe because I've been an activist my whole life, because I have a great well of hope, not optimism, hope. And there's a difference. Optimism is based on closing your eyes. Hope can exist even with your eyes open. So I have a lot of hope that human beings got us into the mess we're in. It wasn't God-given, and that human beings can get us out of the mess we're in. But I don't have any particular optimism or faith that it will happen. But I do know that, like everything else, it's up to us to decide who we want to be and make a stand and then be that person. So to make another inadequate analogy, you and I don't have the privilege of deciding we don't want to live with nuclear weapons. We don't have the privilege of saying we don't want war. War is upon us, and our country's engaged in at least 2 or 3 or more wars, and nuclear weapons exist. We do have a right to choose who we intend to be in light of the existence of nuclear weapons. I choose to be an activist against nuclear weapons. I choose to be an activist against white supremacy. And I think that's how I want to live. That's how I think people ought to live. And I don't think that it guarantees it will win, but it guarantees that you'll be somewhere in the battle.
your book, Race Course Against White Supremacy, yourself and Bernadine Dorn. Do you have any other books that you would like the audience to check out or any other projects you'd like them to look for that you're involved with?
Well, I mean, it's been a pleasure talking to you and to know about your show. Not really. I mean, I wrote a book called Fugitive Days about the Weather Underground, but I've written a lot of books about teaching and about the ways in which teaching and education is a system geared towards inequality. But no, I think that's we can end it right there. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Bill Ayers. I appreciate your time, sir.
I appreciate you. You be well.
Thank you, sir. You too.
Stay strong.
Right. Bill Ayers. Bill Ayers, professor, University of Illinois at Chicago. Not just a professor, he is a distinguished professor of education and a senior university scholar at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And I really hope that resonates with anyone listening out there. This is a white person. If you are not informed about Students for Democratic Society and the Weather Underground and what these people were doing during the 1960s, you should check that out. There's some documentaries and things. There's some books. He says he's written some books on it. He has. You should check that out and really look at the things that they were doing. These people, the Weather Underground, were involved in blowing up federal property. Like, I mean, you can think of 9/11. These people were doing that, except they didn't kill anyone. That's one thing. They made an explicit and consistent effort to make sure that no people were in the buildings that they blew up. But these people blew up government buildings across the country. He said he was a fugitive. He was. It's in his book. He was a fugitive for years. He was wanted. He was one of the most wanted on the FBI's list of individuals. Compare that to Fred Hampton and some of the other individuals, black people, non-white people, who were working against the system of racism, white supremacy during that same time. Fred Hampton and Bill Ayers were both in Chicago. Their offices were right down the street from each other. Fred Hampton was never accused, charged, found with any dynamite or explosives, was not charged with killing anyone, blowing up anything. He was assassinated in his bed next to his pregnant wife at 2 o'clock in the morning. Contrast that with Bill Ayers, white man, who, like I said, participated in an organization that blew up government buildings across the country and is now distinguished professor of education and senior university scholar at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Just think about that. Really lets you know system of racism, white supremacy, the power of being white in that system is incredible. And I try to tell that to people all the time. If I was white, nothing else changed. You wouldn't have to give me $1 billion or anything. I wouldn't have to be Bill Gates balling. Just if I was white, I would be incredibly more effective in doing the work that I do now. I would be way better than Tim Wise, way better than Tim Wise. Just if I was white, I would have so much more credibility, so much more respect for the things that I say about racism, white supremacy. And I suspect that would be the case for any non-white person who has ever uttered a syllable about racism, white supremacy, be it Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, Neely Fuller Jr., Dr. Marimba Ani, anybody you can think of, Mr. Edward Williams, back of the bus, anyone you can think of, they would probably be way more effective if they were white. I guess I have time. I should go check the phone lines. Anybody, you're tuning into the broadcast, if you would like to share a comment, feedback, anything you want to share about what Mr. Ayers said or anything else. If anyone is listening who would like to make a comment or two, if you heard the program with Mr. Tim Wise, the Elvis Presley of counter-racism, I guess I will go to the switchboards and see if anyone is out there, and I'll be right back. Give me a second or two, and I'll check that out. Groovy. I think we have 619, I believe.
Hey, Gus T. Renegade, good show. Yeah, it's too bad that he couldn't stick around for longer. I think that you had a good lineup of questions for him, but I thought that you zeroing in, right, just going to the eighth area was really, really important. And I thought his response about that was a good comeback. I mean, we learn and we learn, right? So his comeback was, well, if a difference in power means that one should never have sex, then why would females ever have sex with males? And that's actually, you said you had heard it before. I had not heard it before. And I was just thinking as he was talking, boy, that's, well, I heard you respond by saying, what's interesting is that I've never heard that being said by anyone non-white. And I would have to share that. I've never heard that either. I think that there's a recognition by non-white people that we're all in the same boat. But by the same token, I think white people, white supremacists specifically, are all in the same boat as well. I mean, males need females. Females need males. That being the case, I'm not really sure where this male supremacy thing is coming from. To the degree that, males are physically stronger than females, females certainly have things to compensate with. If females, by and large, if females just decided to, not have sex with males, I think that would pretty much equalize the power. But then, I think I may be going around in circles, and that's the reason I'm calling, because that would seem to suggest almost what you said, which is that if there's this power dynamic, this differential, then no sex should be going on. So if the only way that females exercise power is by not having sex, and am I making sense, or am I just being very niggerized? And I'm totally open to that criticism, but I'm being very niggerish and not making any sense whatsoever.
Well, I, too, have been niggerized, so I might not be making sense, and many of the folks who tune into the program share that with me frequently. So, we might be, I suspect we're in the same boat at the bottom. I really, as a male, it is difficult for me to comment on how females demonstrate power. I'm not a female, so I'm likely not the best person to ask. I guess it comes down to one, what do you mean when you say power? That might be important to get that clarified.
Thank you. See, this is why you're the host of the show. Okay, I think that I would say I would define power is the ability to change somebody's behavior, is the ability to get someone to do what you want them to do. And from what I've observed, females have a lot of ability to get males to do what they want them to do. Obviously it depends on standards of beauty vary from place to place, but it depends on what is deemed her sexual attractiveness. But not just her sexual attractiveness. I think that there's a certain modality that females have in terms of empathy, in terms of emotional attachment that is more commonly found in females than males. It's pretty well known that most males will say that their best friends, their most empathetic friends are females, and females will say the same thing. So because of that, I think that males really crave the type of attention that females give, even without sex, even without sexual intercourse. But certainly, just attention from females. I think that I personally think that I exercise that power quite a bit. Not in a mean-spirited way, but I think that I get a lot more things than the black males that I know, including the ones that have been my mates. I get things because I'm female, and I smile, and I'm nice, and I get things that if he smiles and he's nice, he doesn't get. So I guess that's how I would define it, and that's partially why I don't think that there's male supremacy, but that just could be because I'm black. I don't know. Maybe white women feel different. I don't know.
I know Number one, I make an effort never to get in these discussions because what I have found is that it leads to confusion and or conflict. And the bottom line is that we're not talking about racism and white supremacy anymore. Now we're talking about whether females have more power or males have more power, and blah, blah, blah. And not that that's not a valid discussion, but the discussion I want to have is about racism, white supremacy. And so I have found that the best way, for me anyway, my technique is to not get into all of that. I make an effort to steer us right back to what we were talking about in the first place, and that is racism, white supremacy. I do have views.
Wait.
Oh, go ahead.
Wait a minute. Okay. So that's an interesting point of view. That's an interesting statement, but I'm trying to figure out how that does not contradict your question to him about the age area. That went straight to sex.
Right.
If you're talking about sex, you're talking about male-female.
Well, and that's the thing. I make sure that I frame when we talk about sex as an issue between non-white people and white people. I don't even bring gender into it, and I have noted that white people, I can even think the first time I spoke with a white person publicly and I brought sex up as an issue, number one, this white person, I'll go ahead and say his name, the suspected white supremacist known as Matthew Hamilton. He is an alumnus, Notre Dame and Brown, very dangerous suspected white supremacist, very, very dangerous individual. I brought this topic up with him, and he divulged that he was in a sexual relationship with a non-white person. So bells immediately went off. This person, when he took what I said back to the non-white people that he's working with, or at the time was working with, in this group that alleged to be against racism, white supremacy, he inserted gender into my statements. Basically, he was not honest in telling them what I said, and he said that I didn't believe non-white females should have sexual intercourse with white males. That's not what I said. And the effect that had was exactly what's happening here. The non-white female snatched that and said, oh, he's a sexist. He's a patriarch. He's just trying to control non-white female sex. See, that's all that is. Blah, blah, blah. And I'm not, and it set up conflict from the very beginning between non-white people who had never seen me, had never heard anything I had to say, were automatically at odds with me because he inserted gender into my discussion, and I had never mentioned gender. The only thing I said was non-white people should not have sex with white people. That was what I said, and I always say it that way. I never bring gender into it because this is what I've seen. It just ends, and I'm not saying that this is not that discussion is not valid. I'm just saying that's not the conversation that I want to participate in. I want to make sure we're focused on racism, white supremacy, and the same thing that he said. I have heard people say that before. I've heard white people say, well, if that's true, then females shouldn't have sex with males. I've heard that. And I always point out, I've heard females say that. I have never heard a significant number of non-white people take the same stance. And they always say exactly what he said. That's true. That's a good point. And then we continue with the discussion of why I think it's incorrect.
No, see, I agree with you. I'm not, I think that I heard you say that you thought that you and I were having conflict, because I don't disagree.
Oh, no, not you and I. No.
Oh, okay. No, I don't have any conflict. I agree with that, but I do think it's central. I think that you and I have had conversations before, and I do think it's central. I don't think that it's about, I do want to talk about white supremacy, but I do think that, as you know, I do think that I agree with Francis Weldon. I think that the core of it is sex. And if we're talking about sex, we're not talking about, in my opinion, if we're talking about sex, I was about to bring up the whole anti-sexual thing, but that's going to take us off track as well. But if you're talking about sex, we're talking about male, female. And it is entirely plausible to me that I heard Francis Weldon say something once that I really agreed with, which is that everyone goes around talking about how white males are the big problem, and non-white people are so willing to focus in on that, while the white female sits back and collects. And I believe that last phrase were her exact words: the white female sits back and collects. So that it's a partnership where the white male goes out and he does all this stuff and he does all this conquering of non-white males and females, and then he brings her the fruits of his conquering. And as a result, he gets stuff. It's the same reason that men drive Corvettes and wear expensive suits and buy big houses. They usually don't do it for themselves. They usually do it for the purposes of having greater sexual access. And so in that sense, I don't really see between white males and white females, I don't see a power dynamic going on there at all. I see a partnership. And so in that sense, while sex is central, sexism, as they call it, male patriarchy, as they call it, that has nothing to do with white supremacy. Sex, yes, if that makes sense.
Have you shared this with other non-white females?
Yeah, I asked, and my response to that is I've tried. I asked in the chat room whether there are any other non-white females in the chat room, and I didn't get a response. It's been my experience. I hope that people who are younger than me have a better experience, but it's been my experience that, and I don't know what the reason for that is, that most of the people who are seriously involved in counter-racism way over 50% are males. It's very rare to find a female, so it's very hard for me to find a female to talk with about it.
You said way over 50%? I'm sorry for interrupting. Over 50% of the population of certainly black people, are female. Probably 51 or 52%. But of counter-racists, it seems like it's like at least 90% are male. Wow, really?
And I don't know. Yeah, in my experience, in terms of counter-racism, yes. Yeah, now maybe not back in Fannie Lou Hamer, civil rights, that type of stuff, but in terms of scientific counter-racism, where you're trying to codify and be logical and do the best thing, it's almost like a math department or a physics department where you find very few females. And that might just be something that is, naturally encoded. I don't know. But because of that, I have found very little opportunity to talk about that with females. I can talk with them about, generally speaking, about the relations between, males and females and about their preferences in terms of, non-white versus white, etc. But in terms of how that relates generally to the concept of racism and counter-racism, I've had very little opportunity to do that because I haven't found many. Even if you go to the discussion boards on counter-racism, the Counter-Racism Work Study Board, and that's an all-comers. Anybody can sit down at the computer and log in and type, but you will find very few females. You will find mostly males.
Do you have a theory as to why that is, or?
Yeah, I unfortunately do. Unfortunately, it reflects on me in a way that isn't particularly happy for me. But this is going to sound very, very strange. I actually had a conversation with my father about this, who used to be a mathematician for NASA, a scientist for NASA, and because of that, I have some of his genetics. But the only reason I bring that up is that, boy, this is going to sound so strange. I think that evolution, it's going to seem long-winded here, but it really does bear to the point. I think that evolution, because the number of the species depends upon the number of females, because a male can impregnate any number of females, but a female can only be pregnant, basically one child at a time, unless she's carrying multiple. She's going to be pregnant, she can only carry one man's seed at a time generally. So because of that, and you can see this when you go to the wild animal part 2, nature takes chances with males and is very conservative with females, which means that statistically there are far more geniuses in any genre, far more male geniuses than female geniuses. Now, I know a lot of females will just cringe to hear another female say that. By the same token, there are far more birth defects, people who are mentally retarded and all kinds of other things that are male autistic than females. The females are, generally speaking, the middle of the road. And counter-racism is the way that it's practiced in terms of a scientific discipline, being very logical, is the cutting edge of thinking on this problem, this social material problem. So because of that, there's a certain level of intelligence, a certain kind of intelligence. I'm not talking, not talking about interpersonal intelligence, but logical intelligence, et cetera, that moves the species forward, that is going to be found more generally in males than females. By the same token, though, I think that when you do have a female who is interested in the subject, I think that the discussion and the way of thinking about it is enriched because it does come from a slightly different perspective. Unfortunately, that evolutionary bias towards females not being able to do it works against actually considering what this rare female has to say. It's like, who is she? So it's kind of she brings something very, very rare, I think. I've known a couple, but at the same time is not really listened to. And it's frustrating sometimes. Sometimes it hurts my feelings. But at the same time, I sort of scientifically understand it. And maybe there's something you can do about that, Mr. Renegade.
Wow. Well, what do you have a suggestion for something that I could do to help remedy? I want to be clear about the problem that we're looking at. The problem of is it the problem of there not being enough females involved in counter-racism, or the females that are there, their views not being heard or respected with the same credibility that a male would be heard?
The latter, because
Okay.
I think that even if because I think it's still going to be a smaller percentage, the ones who are naturally drawn to it. But when those that do come are not, are kind of beat up on, to use the word, then even those few go away. And I think that the effort is made that much poorer because of it. Yeah.
Okay.
So that if and I'm not accusing black males of sexism. I'm not doing that. I'm simply saying they're probably having just a natural evolutionary response to the females doing things, some females doing things that are kind of unusual. But if they could just sort of be very vigilant about that and kind of check themselves on that and just try to be a little bit more open-minded about it, I think that it would help us in what we're trying to do here. So I think I've probably taken up more than my share of time for this time. So I'm going to thank you for the show and continue listening, and I'm going to hang up now.
Oh, wait a minute. You got to plug your program. Are you debuting on Sunday?
That's right. Actually, I wanted to talk with you about off the air about that because actually, I wanted to ask you if maybe you would be a guest or a co-host with me on it. I think I'm going to have to change the subject some. But I do intend for the central subject to be the core basis of sexuality as a motivating force for racism, white supremacy, and I sort of would like a very logical discourse on that. I'm still working on trying to get somebody white as a guest, but I wanted to talk with you off the air. But that's going to be this Sunday at 2 p.m., and the name of my station is CR Engineer, CRE 7, Counter Racist Engineering, and so I look forward to it, and I guess that's my plug, so
2 p.m.
Can I go now?
Pacific? Yes, ma'am, 2 p.m. Pacific.
Oh, yes, 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time.
Okay, 2 p.m. Pacific Sunday, and it's on Blog Talk Radio, correct?
That's correct. Thanks for that.
No problem. We will be there Sunday. Thank you for calling in, and I'll email or what have you to get in contact with you.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Talk
Thank you. Right on. That is an interesting perspective. I had never thought about the number of females, non-white females, who participate in counter-racism. I'll have to think about that. I guess some of it, since I do quite a bit online, you don't really know if the person is a male or a female, although now that I'm thinking about it, it does seem like, I guess, most of the people who post on the code.net that I have discussions with, it seems like most of them are males. Very interesting. I'll have to think about that now. I feel like in my actual face-to-face conversations, I have spoken with a significant number of females who are familiar with the work of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing and Neely Fuller Jr. So I feel like I've had quite a few face-to-face dialogues, but now that I'm incorporating the people that I talk to online, people that I know that tune into my broadcast, I guess it does seem like there are a lot more males. Kind of interesting. I'll think on that some. I guess if the females are not being listened to, I would encourage them to continue to speak up, because I am frequently ridiculed in my efforts to speak out about racism, white supremacy, and I think that's standard for all non-white people. So I would encourage the females, if you're involved in counter-racist work and you feel like your view is not being heard, or you're not being respected or valued for what you have to contribute to the discussion, continue to speak up. Do not allow yourself to be silenced. I think that's the best thing you can do, and to not let that shake your confidence in your thoughts and your ability to construct logic and use logic to work against the system of racism, white supremacy, and to grasp what is happening to you and other non-white people. So I would just encourage all of the females, all female victims of white supremacy, to continue your studies, continue to speak up, speak loud, and they, as I said, they ridicule me too. So expect that to come, and do not be dissuaded. And I'll see if I can continue to encourage the non-white females that I come in contact with to speak out, amplify their voice, make sure that you're heard, so that you can contribute your perspective to solving the problem of racism, white supremacy. I suspect I could check the phone line to see if anyone else wants to share a thought or two. I'll plug her program again. That's CRE7, Counter-Racist Engineer, on blogtalkradio.com. I think she's Sunday, June 7th, Sunday at 2 p.m. Pacific, and I guess that would be 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So yeah, make sure you check that out. I'm sure if you go to blogtalkradio.com and you do a search for counter racism, I'm certain her program will pop up on the first page. Click it, favorite the show, and tune in Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. Tune in. I thought I was going to be listening. Maybe I'll be calling in and sharing my views. So right on, make sure you look out for that. CRE7, more non-white people coming to Blog Talk Radio to discuss racism, white supremacy. Outstanding. I will check the switchboard momentarily and return. Having computer difficulties, so we'll take a minute as the browser resets. I will check the switchboard momentarily. I want to make sure that I do my plugs for the good non-white people who support my program. Please make sure you check Back of the Bus, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com. Please check his blog out. Lots of constructive information about the system of racism, white supremacy. Also, make sure you check out the Frisky Kitty Counter-Racism scratch posts, film reviews, whole nine, lots of goodies on racism, white supremacy. As always, counter-racism.com. Mr. Edward Williams, lots of just all kinds of good stuff. He's got the work study. He's got lots of audio with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., Dr. Frances Cress Welsing himself. The C.O.W.S. is rebroadcast there as well. Just all kinds of stuff, counter-racism television programs where you can watch different videos, counter-racist experiments, counter-racism.com, Mr. Edward Williams. You can also, thecode.net, lots of threads on racism, white supremacy. You have counter-racist film reviews there, lots of constructive information. You can go there and exchange views on the code and other aspects of racism, white supremacy, so thecode.net. my blog as well. Now that I don't have a show scheduled for at least a couple days, so I can actually take time and finish my counter-racist film review for Pulp Fiction. So the blog, racism-notes.blogspot.com. You can check that out. Is anybody else? If anyone, if I'm forgetting, you can check Dave Myers, discussrace.com. He is a loyal caller for the cows. Thank him for tuning in. Discussrace.com, that's his site. Any other, blacktalkradio.com. Thank you, Scotty. They always promote the show. Folks have come over and listened to go there. blacktalkradio.net. Check them out. Thank you, everyone who supports over there, as well as harambeconnection.ning, dayofoutrage.ning. Thank you, Mr. Nat Turner. He's listened to the show. He's called in, supports the program. I appreciate his support. Diva JC, loyal listener. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the shows. I appreciate the support. Hopefully more of us will be informed about racism, white supremacy, what it is, how it works, and what we should be doing to work against this system and produce justice in the quickest amount of time possible. And I really think that not having sexual intercourse with white people would really accelerate that process. Now I've done all my plugs for the people that I needed to support. I will hope that the computer has loaded. I will check the switchboard and see if anybody's there to bring on for the show. All righty, 954.
Yes.
Is this
Gus.
Yes,
this
ma'am.
This is me.
I suspected. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful. I'm blessed, and I plan on staying that way.
Outstanding.
Mm-hmm. What I did want to address was what the sister that was just on a minute ago.
Yes, ma'am.
Her program sounds very interesting.
Sunday, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I will try, if I'm not otherwise engaged, I will try to, be there. What I want to say is, I just wrote a book called A History of African American Jazz and Blues. And I specified that because to differentiate between jazz and blues made by other people, okay?
What do you mean by other people?
I mean Europeans or Asians.
Okay.
Jazz music came from the experience of Africans in America. However, it has been usurped and revamped for commercial use by all other groups around the world simply because the music is a freeing music. Okay? You understand what I'm saying? And it has also been my experience that, yes, often women are hesitant to be controversial, in your face about anything. They don't believe in being, what is the word that I'm trying to say? Confrontational.
Confrontation.
Yes. However, what many people don't understand is that most wars were begun either by a woman or because of a woman. And so it is incumbent upon women to speak out about the abnormalities and injustices that they are faced with, from whatever goes on in their home to what goes on in their immediate community to what goes on in their country and what goes on their continent and what goes on in the world. But unfortunately, women remain unconfrontational, and that, for me, is the reason why there are so many disparities in the world. Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. So I call on women to, wake up, speak up, get away, stop being shy and letting the world go by, and then you have your little conversations in your coffee clutch. Meanwhile, the world is, going on. I call on women to, you don't have to pick up a gun in order to affect change, but you do have to be outspoken. And those women who, like me, tend to be extremely outspoken are often the brunt of jokes by many women who refuse to be outspoken. And that makes it even more difficult. So I think that the young lady has a very real contention. And I think that more women need to be more outspoken. Because you were saying that you found that you didn't think about that. You hadn't thought about that the people that were involved in this controversy that you so aptly carry on your show are mostly men. So maybe also you should be more proactive in finding women to be your guests. That could be something that I could suggest that you can do.
I will definitely look at that in terms of who I bring on the show. Is your phone on speaker? I'm echoing.
Yes, I'm sorry. Let me take you off the speaker. I apologize. Was I echoing the whole time?
You were not.
Oh, okay.
You were not. I appreciate it. Thank you. But yes, I will definitely take that into consideration in terms of the guests that I bring on the show, although I am very upfront in telling everyone I seek out, want white people on my show. I'm much more interested in talking to white people. I feel that I get much more constructive information. I spoke with Dr. Welsing about this, and at first she seemed to suggest that she felt I should be looking to get more non-white people on the program, but after I told her some of the guests that I had on the program and things that they said and information that I got from them, she too saw that it was a constructive thing, and she actually suggested 2 white people for me to bring on the program. So that's number one. So if I did have females on the program, they would be white women, most likely, just because I just don't do – I'd rather do white people. I feel like I can say what I want with them. I don't have to worry as much about conflict. So I really make it. And I think if you look at my programs, the evidence bears that out. I've had mostly white guests. I suspect they have mostly been males, but I can tell you just looking at the folks that I think are coming down the road, there will be quite a few females coming for the month of June. although I think most of them will probably be white, but, that's by design. So, if you don't like that, then, this probably is not the program for you. I hope it's in the effort of being constructive, but,
Well, you're really not speaking to me, because I come and join your show at every turn, every time that I possibly can. And I agree with you that the conversation that you're having should involve white people. I think that you have confrontation from black people, because, black people don't think that there is anything wrong. Unfortunately, they don't understand, in my field of music, I am clear that the people that get the recognition in the music are white people, not non-white people who are the inventors of this music. You understand? And I also am clear at every step of the way that this music belongs to people of color, and particularly Africans in America. You see? So, and the music was the rhetoric of black people. And in the churches, the music is the rhetoric, in the clubs, the money that has been made in the black community has basically come from the musical community. Of course, you do have a lot of athletes, who bring economics into the community. But if you look at the bulk of money that has been made by Africans in America, it has been made by people in the music industry, even though many of them have been duped by the publishers, agents, promoters, managers, so on and so forth. Okay. Well, I was on a radio show last night. I was a guest of a young man named Heru on Harambe radio, and he said to me that if people like John Coltrane hadn't signed contracts with unscrupulous agents and record companies, nobody would know who he was. Well, that could be true, but I don't agree with that at all. I think that John Coltrane was a phenomenon. What I do know that I'm reading the story of Mary Lou Williams, and her experiences are rarely known by many black people, and if you read the book, Soul on Soul, The Life and Music of Mary Lou Williams, you learn about how the music changed the black community, how women were marginalized not just by white people, but by non-white musicians. Many of them stole her music, didn't give her credit, she didn't get her copyright and royalties because they duped her. She tried to save so many of the black musicians from drug addiction. Why were they being drug addicted in the first place? Because of their stance in the community, that they could entertain, but they couldn't come through the front door. So I just want to say, I think that you do need to have more female guests, but I think that you should also bring more women of color, non-white women who have understanding and who are outspoken. I mean, you need to get Angela Davis on your show. We've talked about this before anyway. But it'd be great if you could get her on your show.
Hey,
because she's an expert.
If she would be willing, I would be more than happy and would promote it like no other. If she would be willing to come on the show and chat about her experiences with racism, white supremacy, I would be giddy to have her for sure. And if anyone has contact,
I'm having a meeting this evening with one of her dearest friends and colleagues. Dr. Carol Boyce Davies is a woman that you should have on your program. Dr. Carol Boyce Davies. Go to CABA Fair, CABAFAIR. I'm building the website as we speak. And Dr. Boyce Davies was the head of Africana Studies at Florida International University for about 5 or 6 years. Now she's at Cornell University, and she teaches Caribbean literature, women in literature, particularly. She was the editor of the Encyclopedia of the African Diaspora. She is well-versed in racism and in, bringing more understanding about the disparities and injustices in the diaspora, Africans outside of Africa. So I will certainly suggest to her this evening, I'll send you an email addressed to her that you can speak to her, and she can facilitate, I'm not going to say that it's definitely going to happen because I don't speak for other people.
Oh, for
but
sure.
She could facilitate your having a conversation with Angela Davis, Dr. Angela Davis. So,
I would be game. I would definitely be game, and I would be giddy to have her on the program. If she wanted to come through to talk about racism, white supremacy, hey, I will make it happen. I'll make it happen. So if you give me the email, I'll see what I can do. I'll definitely
do it, and I'll speak to her this evening about coming on your show, being your guest, and getting Angela Davis on the show too.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
Plug your show, please.
My show is on tonight from 6 to 8, Music Woman, at blogtalkradio.com/Music Woman, and it is sponsored by Women in Jazz South Florida, Incorporated, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that promotes women in music. Simply because they've been marginalized, I do try to have many, many African-American women because that's where the music came from. However, recently I found that very few African-American women are writing their own music. And I feature women who compose and perform their own music. So in the month of May, I found myself with 5 white women. Tonight I'm interviewing a white pianist. But next week I have Kathy Yolanda Rice, and I'm actually going to have 2 men this month also. So I encourage everyone to listen to blogtalkradio.com/Music Woman at 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Diva JC. Thank you.
Thank you. Check out the program for sure. I have been there listening many times. I will be back for sure to hear some more of the artists and hear some of the good music and discourse on jazz and blues. I will definitely be back, and I hope some of the people that are tuning in will check your show out as well. And, yes, I'll be looking for the email, see if we can make this happen.
We're going to do it, and go to WIJS as in South F, Florida, womeninjazzsouthflorida.com. Check us out.
Outstanding. Thank you for calling in. I appreciate your support, listening in. I appreciate it very much. Always nice to know I have a loyal listener down there in Florida checking out the program. I appreciate it.
You definitely do.
For sure. Diva JC, always checking us out down in Florida. I will be in touch pronto.
Wonderful.
I want to thank everybody. Thank you.
I'm going to sign off now. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right on. Again, Diva JC, please check out her program, Blog Talk Radio, on Wednesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Check out our program. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to another broadcast of the C.O.W.S. Context of White Supremacy. Would again encourage you to go through, dig, check out the archives. Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing has been here, Tim Wise, Dr. Robert Jensen, Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly. Again, if you would like more information on the white people in the FBI who participated in the assassination of Fred Hampton, you can check out that program from April with Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly. He did an entire book, Racial Matters, on the FBI's systematic abuse of non-white people. Very interesting program. Again, that's, I believe, April 13th was when it went down, but it's in the archives. If you're listening to this program on the Blog Talk Radio site, you can just click through my archives and you'll bump into it. Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly. Very interesting program. Again, want to point out, Mr. Ayers said non-white people, system of racism, white supremacy, cannot be racist, and that if a white person says that a non-white person is racist, they are practicing racism, white supremacy. I especially want to point that out for there's a listener, Corsican. He was in the chat room on Monday. He said he suspected I was a racist. This is a white person. I want to point that out. I suspect this individual is a racist, white supremacist. Make sure I get that in. He has been hovering around the radio program. I have seen him on other sites engaging with people, non-white people who are talking about racism, white supremacy, and every time he's telling them that there's no such thing as racism, white supremacy, telling them that they're incorrect in what they're doing, complaining about their posts and their work. He's been to various blogs. He's been to my blog posting and saying that my blog is incorrect and sad. He's been to other non-white people's blogs and done the same thing. I suspect this white person is a racist, white supremacist, and I just want to point that behavior out. You will see this happen in the system of racism, white supremacy. So just be mindful if you see any white people hanging around, if you're doing counter-racist work and they're telling you that you are a racist if you're a non-white person. Just be mindful. Keep that in mind that this person is probably practicing racism, white supremacy, and just keep going about your business. It probably means that you're doing something effective. That's what you should take it as, that you're doing something effective. Do more of what it is that you're doing. If this white person, Corsican, or any other one, has a problem with you discussing racism, white supremacy. That will wrap it up. It looks like I will have a program this Friday. If you've heard me before, the CHID class at the University of Washington, Comparative History of Ideas, they're having a program Friday evening, 7 p.m. Pacific time at the University of Washington's Ethnic Cultural Theater. How about that for a name? But that's this Friday at 7 p.m. Pacific time. I am in the performance. Gus T. Renegade will be performing and directly addressing racism, white supremacy. So that will be a hoot. I am very excited and looking forward to Friday, and I will be making an effort to do a live broadcast from the after party of this show, and I hope to speak with some of the white people who participated in this class. I had many. We did a lecture for this class, and we also had some discussions about racism, white supremacy. Some of them got very heated. The issue of sexual intercourse between non-white people and white people was brought up, revealed some very interesting things. So I'm just, man, I am ecstatic and eager to get things going on Friday. And again, there should be a live broadcast from the after party of the CHID performance. I hope to bring as many of the students and faculty members as I can to come and share their experiences that they had in this course that's titled Rethinking Diversity. I hope they will come through and share. I've told the white people if they're going to come and share, they have to give me at least one racist joke. So it should be very interesting to get feedback on what happened at the performance and their thoughts on the class in general. So that should be Friday. It's going to be late. We're on the West Coast here, so the show will probably start around 10 o'clock Pacific time. So if you're on the East Coast and you can hang 1 a.m. Saturday morning, Context of White Supremacy should be broadcasting live from the CHID after party. Should be, I think, a constructive program, and I think there'll be a lot of interesting tidbits within that particular program. Again, please check out the episode with Mr. Tim Wise, the Elvis Presley of counter-racism. Very interesting broadcast. Constructive information there, I believe. I apologize again, my battery died, so I was not able to end the last program. But check that out. Check the archives out. Thank you, everyone who called in. Thank you again, Mr. Bill Ayers, sharing his views on racism, white supremacy. Subscribe to the program if you're listening directly at Blog Talk Radio. And, check out Cree 7's program this Sunday, June 7th at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Gus T. Renegade, The Context of White Supremacy. End of the broadcast.